Someone is watching you right now. Not me. Someone else. Someone who paid cryptocurrency to access your device the moment you clicked this page. Don't believe me? Check your webcam light. Still off? That doesn't mean anything anymore. My name is Marcus, and I made a mistake that cost me everything I thought was safe in this world. It started on a Tuesday night in February 2024, sitting alone in my studio apartment in Portland, Oregon. I was 29 years old, working as a freelance graphic designer, and spending way too many hours online when I should have been sleeping. I'd always been curious about the deep web, that hidden layer of the internet most people never see. Not for anything illegal, just pure curiosity about what existed beyond Google's reach. After watching a few tutorials, I downloaded the Tor browser and started exploring. Most sites were boring, just forums about privacy and cryptocurrency, nothing sinister. Then I found a link buried in a Reddit thread that had been deleted. Someone had posted it and then removed it within minutes, but I'd screenshotted it before it vanished. The URL was just a random string of letters and numbers ending in .onion. When I clicked it, the page loaded slowly, revealing a black screen with white text at the top that simply said, "The Gallery." Below that was a grid of thumbnail images, maybe 50 of them, all showing different people in what looked like candid photographs. Nothing graphic or disturbing at first glance, just regular people going about their lives. A woman at a coffee shop, a man walking his dog, a teenager on a bicycle. But something felt wrong about these images. The angles were too intimate, too close, like the photographer had been hiding nearby. I clicked on one thumbnail showing a young woman with red hair sitting at a park bench. It expanded into a full gallery, dozens of photos of the same person taken over what looked like several weeks. Her at the grocery store, her coming out of an apartment building, her through a window sitting at her kitchen table. The timestamps were recent, within the last month. At the bottom of the gallery was a single line of text that made my blood run cold. Active project. Ongoing documentation. I should have closed the browser right then. Should have walked away and never looked back. Instead, I clicked through more galleries. Each one showed a different person, always with dozens of photos taken without their knowledge, always with that same chilling description about active documentation. Some galleries had been marked complete, and I didn't want to think about what that meant. What really got to me was how ordinary these people looked. They weren't celebrities or public figures. They were regular people like me, living normal lives, completely unaware that someone was tracking their every movement. One gallery showed a man who looked about my age, dark hair, glasses, wearing a blue jacket I recognized because I owned the same one. The photos showed him at a gym, at a supermarket, at what looked like his workplace parking lot. I was about to close the site when I noticed something in the corner of my screen. A small notification icon I hadn't seen before, showing a red dot with the number 1. I clicked it without thinking, and a message window opened. The message was from an account called Curator, and it simply said, "Thank you for visiting. Your interest has been noted." My hands started shaking. I quickly closed the browser and shut down my laptop, sitting in the dark trying to convince myself it was just an automated message, something that went to everyone who visited the site. But deep down, I knew better. Someone had been watching me while I watched them. I barely slept that night, lying awake listening to every sound in the building, wondering if someone was outside my door. Morning came with no incident, and I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. I went to the gym like I always did on Wednesday mornings, got my usual coffee from the shop down the street, came home and tried to work. Everything felt normal until I checked my email around noon. There was a message from an address I didn't recognize, no subject line. Inside was a single photograph. Me, walking into my apartment building that morning, carrying my coffee cup, wearing the gray hoodie I'd put on just a few hours ago. The photo had been taken from across the street, partially hidden behind a parked car. Below the image was a caption, "Day 1. Documentation begins." I dropped my phone like it had burned me. For a long moment, I just stood there in my living room, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had followed me this morning. Someone had been watching me, photographing me, and now they were letting me know about it. This wasn't random. This was deliberate, targeted, personal. I called the police and spent 2 hours at the station trying to explain what had happened. The officer taking my report was professional, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. A creepy website and one photo of me outside my own building wasn't much to go on. He took down all the information, gave me a case number, and told me to contact them if anything else happened. I left feeling more alone than when I'd arrived. Over the next 3 days, I received a photo every morning. Me at the grocery store holding a basket of vegetables. Me at the laundromat, sitting and waiting for my clothes. Me through my apartment window, visible from the street, eating dinner at my small kitchen table. Each photo had a new caption marking the days. Day 2, patterns emerging. Day 3, schedule confirmed. Day 4, routines established. I stopped going outside except when absolutely necessary. I covered all my windows with sheets and blankets, turning my apartment into a dark cave. I changed my email password, my phone number, everything I could think of. The photos stopped coming to my email, and for a moment I thought maybe it was over. Then they started appearing in my physical mailbox. Printed photos, slipped into unmarked envelopes, delivered while I was inside. Day 5, Day 6, Day 7. Each one showing me in the brief moments I had to leave my apartment for work meetings or food. Whoever was doing this had patience and resources. They knew where I lived, where I went, what I did. They were always watching, always one step ahead. The police increased patrols around my building but never saw anyone suspicious. I installed a security camera at my door, but whoever was delivering the photos knew exactly where the camera's blind spots were. 2 weeks in, I was barely functioning. Not sleeping, barely eating, jumping at every sound. My work dried up because I couldn't focus on anything except the constant fear that someone was watching. Then came the photo that broke me completely. It showed the inside of my apartment, taken from my bedroom doorway, showing me asleep in my bed. They had been inside. While I was unconscious and vulnerable, someone had stood in my home and photographed me. The caption read, "Day 19, access confirmed. Gallery complete." I packed a bag that same hour and left. Didn't tell my landlord, didn't tell anyone where I was going. I drove to my brother's house 3 states away and stayed there for 2 months. Too terrified to return. The photos stopped coming, but the fear never really went away. I eventually moved to a different city, changed my name legally, and started over with nothing. That was 9 months ago. I still check over my shoulder constantly, still cover every camera on every device I own, still feel a spike of panic whenever I see someone taking photos in public. The worst part isn't the fear though. It's knowing that somewhere out there, in some dark corner of the internet, there's a gallery with my face in it, marked complete. And I'll never know who saw it, who saved those images, or whether someone, somewhere, is still watching me through whatever digital cracks I haven't found yet. The deep web isn't just a place where bad things are sold. Sometimes it's where bad things are created, documented, and shared. And once you become part of that documentation, you never really escape it. You just learn to live with the knowledge that your life, your privacy, your safety was turned into entertainment for people you'll never see and never stop. Story 2, The Red Room Invitation. Sarah Chen here. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand that I consider myself a rational person. I have a degree in computer science, I work in cybersecurity, and I thought I understood the risks of exploring the dark web. I was wrong about everything. It was late October 2023, and I was researching a paper on online security vulnerabilities. My work required me to understand how criminals operate in hidden spaces, so I spent several weeks navigating various dark web forums, always taking precautions, always staying anonymous. Or so I believed. I'd heard rumors about red rooms, those supposed live torture streams that internet legends are made of. Most security experts agree they're myths, that the bandwidth requirements and legal risks make them impractical. I believed that too until I received an invitation. It came through an encrypted message to an email address I'd created specifically for this research, an address I'd never used anywhere else. The message was short. You've been selected for an exclusive viewing. Your presence is requested. Below that was a link and a date and time exactly 48 hours away. What made me freeze wasn't the message itself, but the attachment, a photo of me sitting at my desk at home, taken through my window from 2 nights ago. I was wearing the same red sweater visible in the photo, and I could see my laptop screen reflected in my glasses, showing the exact forum I'd been browsing. My first instinct was to delete everything and report it to the police. But curiosity, that dangerous human trait, whispered that maybe I could learn something valuable. Maybe this was exactly the kind of evidence needed to shut down these operations. I convinced myself I was being brave, being thorough in my research. Looking back, I was just being stupid. I spent the next 47 hours preparing. I set up multiple VPN layers, used a virtual machine, and arranged to be at a friend's house during the viewing, so I wouldn't be alone. I told myself I'd just watch for a few minutes, gather information, then contact the authorities. When the time came, I clicked the link with shaking hands. The stream loaded quickly, surprisingly high quality. It showed a dark room, concrete walls, a single chair in the center under a harsh white light. The chair was empty. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then text appeared at the bottom of the screen. "Welcome, Sarah. We've been waiting for you." My real name. They knew my real name. Before I could close the browser, the camera angle shifted, and I saw something that made my heart stop. The room wasn't empty anymore. There was a person tied to the chair, hood over their head, wearing clothes I recognized. A blue jacket with a torn left pocket. My roommate Jennifer had a jacket exactly like that, torn in exactly that spot. She'd left for work that morning wearing it. I grabbed my phone and called Jennifer. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. Panic was setting in now, real and sharp. I tried to convince myself this was fake, some kind of elaborate trick using props and coincidence. Then the figure in the chair moved, struggling against the restraints, and I heard a muffled voice that sounded terrifyingly like Jennifer's. Text appeared on screen again. "You have a choice, Sarah. You can close the stream and walk away, or you can stay and watch what happens when people dig too deep into places they don't belong. You have 10 seconds to decide." I couldn't move, couldn't think. My finger hovered over the close button while my mind raced through impossible scenarios. If this was real, closing the stream wouldn't save Jennifer. If this was fake, I was being manipulated. Either way, I was trapped in a moment where every decision felt wrong. I chose wrong. I closed the stream and immediately called 911, blurting out everything to a dispatcher who sounded skeptical but professional. Then I called my landlord, who agreed to check our apartment. The wait was agonizing, 23 minutes that felt like hours. Finally, my phone rang. It was Jennifer. She was fine. She'd left work early feeling sick and had been asleep with her phone on silent. The blue jacket was hanging in her closet, right where it always was. The overwhelming relief I felt was quickly replaced by confusion and then horror. If Jennifer was safe, who had been in that chair? I opened my laptop again, knowing I shouldn't, and found a new message waiting. "Wrong choice, Sarah. But don't worry, everyone gets a second chance. We'll be in touch. That was 4 months ago. Jennifer never knew how close I thought she came to danger that night. I finished my research paper without mentioning any of this, and I left my job in cybersecurity shortly after. Some knowledge isn't worth having. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. I still don't know who was in that chair or if anyone was there at all. I don't know if the whole thing was an elaborate hoax designed to terrify me, or if something worse happened in that room after I closed the stream. What I do know is that someone out there has my real name, my address, my face, and the power to make me believe they can reach anyone I care about. I moved to a different city. I don't do security research anymore, and I never, ever explore places online that I don't absolutely need to be. Because the dark web isn't just dark because of what happens there. It's dark because once you look into it, it looks back into you. And sometimes, it reaches through the screen and reminds you that there's no such thing as true anonymity. Not really. Not when someone wants to find you badly enough. Story 3. The Auction. Daniel Reeves, 35, formerly of Baltimore, Maryland. What I'm about to tell you cost me my career, my home, and my ability to trust anything I see online. I made my living as an investigative journalist, specializing in organized crime and human trafficking networks. In spring of 2023, I was working on a story about dark web marketplaces when a source sent me a link to something that shouldn't exist. They called it The Auction, and they warned me that just viewing it could put me in danger. Naturally, I clicked it anyway. The site loaded onto what looked like a professional auction house website, complete with lot numbers, bidding interfaces, and even customer service contact information. But instead of antiques or art, the items for sale were people. Real people with photographs, physical descriptions, ages, and locations. Each listing treated human beings like merchandise, complete with condition reports and provenance. What made it worse was how clinical it all seemed. Professional photography, detailed biographies, even testimonials from previous buyers. This wasn't some crude criminal operation. This was organized, funded, and terrifyingly sophisticated. I started documenting everything, taking screenshots, noting patterns in the listings. Then I noticed something that made my professional interest turn into personal horror. One of the listings showed a young woman I recognized. Her name was Amanda Pacheco, and she'd been a source for one of my earlier articles about labor trafficking in the restaurant industry. We'd met 3 times in person, and I'd promised her anonymity. Now here she was, listed as Lot 47, with details about her daily routine that were disturbingly accurate. I immediately tried to contact Amanda. Her phone was disconnected. I reached out to the advocacy group that had connected us initially, and they told me Amanda had stopped responding to their messages 2 weeks ago. They'd assumed she'd gotten scared and gone underground. Now I feared something much worse. The listing for Amanda had a countdown timer showing the auction would end in 72 hours. The current bid was displayed in cryptocurrency, equivalent to about $35,000. As I watched, the number increased. Someone had just bid higher. I was watching a human being sold in real time, and that human being was someone I'd interviewed, someone whose trust I'd earned, someone who might be in danger because of me. I spent the next 3 hours trying to figure out what to do. Contact the FBI? But with what evidence? Screenshots of a dark website that could disappear at any moment? And how quickly could they move? The auction was ending in less than 3 days. I made copies of everything and sent them to a colleague with instructions to forward them to law enforcement if I didn't check in within 48 hours. Then I did something incredibly stupid. I created an account on the auction site and placed a bid. The interface accepted my bid and asked me to deposit funds into an escrow account to verify my identity as a serious buyer. I had no intention of actually paying, but I needed to see if I could contact the sellers, maybe learn something about their operation, maybe buy time. I deposited the minimum amount required, $500 in Bitcoin, funds I knew I'd never see again. Within minutes, I received a message from the site administrators thanking me for my interest and informing me that I'd been outbid. The current price for Lot 47 was now $42,000. The message included a helpful suggestion that I might also be interested in similar inventory and linked to 3 other listings, all young women, all matching Amanda's basic description. What happened next happened fast. My phone rang from an unknown number. When I answered, a calm male voice said, "Mr. Reeves, we appreciate your interest in our services, but we don't accept journalists as clients. Your deposit has been refunded, and your account has been terminated. We strongly suggest you abandon this investigation. Consider this a professional courtesy." The call ended before I could respond. My hands were shaking as I checked the Bitcoin wallet. The $500 was already back, transferred in the few seconds since the call ended. They knew who I was. They knew what I did for a living, and they'd tracked me down in the time it took to place a single bid. I contacted the FBI immediately, walking into their Baltimore field office with everything I'd collected. They took my statements seriously, transferred the investigation to their cybercrimes division, and told me to stop digging. I tried to comply. I really did. Amanda's listing disappeared from the site the next day, marked as sale completed. I never found out what happened to her. The FBI investigation went nowhere, the site vanished within a week, and my source who'd sent me the original link stopped responding to all contact attempts. 2 months later, I received a package at my home. Inside was a professional photograph of me, sitting in my car outside the FBI building the day I'd gone to report everything. Below the photo was a printed note. "We told you to stop. This is your final warning." I moved out of Baltimore the next week. I left investigative journalism entirely, and now I write restaurant reviews for a local paper in the Midwest under a pen name. I sleep with my phone next to my bed, and I check the locks 3 times every night. Because somewhere out there, there's an organization sophisticated enough to run human auctions on the dark web, professional enough to track anyone who gets too close, and powerful enough to make people disappear. Amanda Pacheco is still listed as a missing person. I think about her every single day. I think about the fact that I might have led them to her by being careless with operational security. I think about the other faces I saw on that site, people who became merchandise because they were vulnerable and invisible. And I think about how easy it was for them to find me, track me, and make it clear that my life existed at their mercy. The dark web isn't just a marketplace for illegal goods. Sometimes it's a marketplace for people. And the buyers aren't monsters hiding in shadows. They're organized, professional, and so confident in their power that they warn their critics instead of silencing them. Because they know the warning is enough. Because they know that once you've seen what they're capable of, you'll choose silence over courage every single time. I chose silence. I'm choosing it right now by not publishing any of the evidence I collected, by not naming the specific agencies I contacted, by not doing anything that might make them remember I exist. This isn't bravery. This is survival. And if you're reading this thinking you might want to investigate these things yourself, please learn from my mistake. Some truths are too dangerous to expose. Story 4. The Subscriber. My name is Rachel Voss, and for 2 years I ran a small YouTube channel about urban exploration. Nothing too extreme, just abandoned buildings, forgotten places, the kind of content that gets a few thousand views if you're lucky. I was 27, living in Denver, and treating the channel as a hobby while working retail to pay my bills. In August 2023, I uploaded a video exploring an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of the city. It was a standard episode, me walking through empty corridors with a flashlight, talking about the building's history. The video got normal engagement, maybe 3,000 views, a handful of comments. Nothing special. Then I got a private message from a user named DarkLens93. The message said they really enjoyed my exploration style and asked if I'd ever considered exploring more exclusive locations. They mentioned they had access to places that weren't publicly known and would be willing to guide me to them, remotely for a fee. The message included a sample video showing what looked like an abandoned military bunker, filmed in night vision with production quality way beyond anything I could afford. I was intrigued. The offer seemed legitimate enough, and the idea of finding truly unique locations was tempting. We exchanged several messages over the next week. DarkLens93 was knowledgeable about urban exploration, knew the right terminology, and seemed genuinely interested in helping me grow my channel. They offered to send me coordinates to 3 locations within driving distance, completely free as a trial. The first location was an abandoned warehouse about an hour outside Denver. The coordinates were precise, leading me to a building that wasn't marked on any urban exploration forums I followed. I brought my usual equipment, camera, flashlight, portable battery, and spent 2 hours filming. The place was perfect, untouched, full of interesting decay. I uploaded the video that night, and it immediately performed better than my usual content, getting 10,000 views in the first day. DarkLens93 messaged me congratulations and sent coordinates for the second location. This one was farther out, almost 2 hours into rural Colorado, an abandoned mining facility built into a hillside. Again, the location was spectacular, and my video got even more views. I was excited. This collaboration was exactly the boost my channel needed. The third location came with specific instructions. DarkLens93 told me to arrive exactly at midnight, to bring night vision equipment if possible, and to make sure I explored the basement level. They said the basement had something special that would make for incredible content. The coordinates led to what looked like an old research facility, isolated and surrounded by forest. I should have questioned why midnight mattered, should have wondered why they were so specific about the basement. But I was caught up in the success of the previous videos, and I trusted DarkLens93 by then. They'd been nothing but helpful and accurate so far. I arrived at 11:50 p.m. on a Friday in late September. The building was larger than I expected, 3 stories of concrete and broken windows. I found an entrance and made my way inside, filming as I went. The upper floors were typical abandoned building stuff, graffiti, broken furniture, evidence of teenagers partying. I found the stairwell leading down and checked my watch. 11:58 p.m. Perfect timing. The basement was different. Clean, almost too clean for an abandoned building. The walls were bare concrete, and there was a smell I couldn't identify, something chemical and sterile. My footsteps echoed as I walked down the corridor, camera light cutting through the darkness. Then I found the room. It was set up like a studio. Professional lighting equipment, expensive cameras on tripods, and in the center, a chair with restraints. The setup looked recent. No dust, cables neatly organized. This wasn't abandoned. This was active. I was standing in someone's functional space, and every instinct was screaming at me to leave. That's when I heard footsteps above me. Multiple people moving with purpose. I killed my light immediately and pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering in my chest. Voices echoed down the stairwell, too distant to make out words, but the tone was conversational, casual. They weren't looking for me yet. They didn't know I was here. I moved as quietly as possible toward the exit I'd used, but the footsteps were coming down the stairs. I found a side room and hid behind some old equipment, barely breathing, watching shadows move across the walls as people entered the basement. 3 of them, carrying cases and talking about tonight's session and the client's specifications. Through a crack in the door, I watched them set up in the studio room. They adjusted cameras, tested lights, and discussed camera angles like this was a normal film production. Then one of them checked their phone and said, "Talent arrives in 15 minutes. Let's make sure everything's ready." I realized with absolute clarity what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't an abandoned building. This was a dark web production facility, and Darklens 93 hadn't been helping me. They'd been setting me up, luring me to this location at this specific time. I was supposed to be the talent. I waited until they were focused on their equipment. Then I moved. I didn't run, didn't risk the noise. I walked as fast as I dared, retracing my steps to the stairwell, expecting any second to hear shouts or running footsteps behind me. I made it to the ground floor and then outside, and only then did I run, sprinting to my car and driving away with my lights off until I was miles down the road. I went straight to the police. They took my report and sent officers to the location I described. The building was empty when they arrived. No equipment, no people, no evidence that anything I described had been there. Just an abandoned research facility that looked like it hadn't been occupied in years. They found my footprints in the dust on the upper floors, but nothing in the basement. It was clean, like it had been professionally swept. Darklens 93's account disappeared from YouTube that same night. All our messages were deleted from my inbox, though I had screenshots saved. The police investigated but found nothing concrete. No evidence of human trafficking, no record of the property being used recently, nothing. I deleted my channel the next week. Deleted every video, every post, every trace of my urban exploration hobby. Because I understood something that still keeps me awake at night. Someone had been watching my content, studying my patterns, learning that I explored alone and documented everything. They'd built trust slowly, given me legitimate locations first, then set the trap. If I'd arrived 15 minutes later, if I'd been more trusting and less paranoid, if I'd waited in that basement just a little longer, I would have met the talent arriving for that session. And I have nightmares about what would have happened then, what those cameras were there to record, what kind of client was waiting somewhere in the world to watch whatever Darklens 93 had planned. I work a different job now, nowhere near social media or content creation. I don't go to abandoned buildings anymore. And when people ask me why I deleted my channel right when it was starting to grow, I just say I lost interest. Because the real answer, that I was almost trafficked by someone who spent months grooming me through YouTube messages, sounds too much like paranoid fiction. But it wasn't fiction. It was a calculated operation that used my own ambitions against me. And somewhere out there, Darklens 93 is still operating, still watching channels, still sending helpful messages to creators who explore alone. The dark web isn't just a place where horrible things are bought and sold. Sometimes it reaches out into the normal internet, into platforms we use every day, and it hunts. Story 5. The Support Forum. I'm keeping my real name private, but you can call me Alex. In early 2024, I was going through the hardest period of my life, dealing with grief after losing someone close to me. I was isolated, barely functioning, and desperately looking for people who understood what I was feeling. Late one night, I found a link to a grief support forum on the deep web. It seemed legitimate, well-designed, with thousands of posts from people sharing their experiences with loss. Unlike surface web forums, this one promised complete anonymity, no emails required, no personal information. Just a username and the ability to talk openly without judgment. I joined and immediately felt welcomed. People responded to my posts within minutes, offering sympathy and understanding. For the first time in months, I felt less alone. I spent hours every night on that forum, reading others' stories and sharing my own. The community seemed genuine, supportive, exactly what I needed. After 2 weeks, a moderator reached out privately. They said they'd noticed I was struggling more than most and offered access to a private subforum for people dealing with severe grief. They called it the recovery room and said it was limited to members who the moderation team felt needed extra support. I was grateful to be selected. The recovery room was smaller, maybe 15 active members, and the conversations were deeper, more raw. People talked about their darkest thoughts, their struggles with wanting to give up, their feelings of complete hopelessness. It felt like a safe space to be honest about the worst parts of grief. Then things started changing subtly. Moderators began posting resources about alternative recovery methods. At first, these seemed like typical holistic wellness suggestions, meditation, journaling, support groups. But gradually, the recommendations became stranger. They talked about releasing pain through ritual, about finding peace through sacrifice, using language that felt increasingly cult-like. Other members seemed to accept these ideas without question. Some posted about following the suggested rituals and feeling better afterward. The moderators encouraged sharing details, asking specific questions about people's living situations, their isolation levels, whether they had family checking on them regularly. I started feeling uncomfortable, but I stayed because I'd formed connections with these people. We'd shared intimate details about our grief. I felt obligated to the community. That's how they get you. One evening, a moderator sent me a private ritual to perform. They said it was customized based on my specific posts, designed to help me process my grief. The ritual involved writing a letter to the person I'd lost, then burning it at a specific time, 3 a.m., while live streaming myself through an encrypted video link they provided. They said other members would be watching to hold space for my healing. Something about that request finally triggered my alarm bells. Why did they need to watch me? Why that specific time? I declined politely, saying I wasn't ready for that level of ritual. The moderator's response was immediate and cold. They said the recovery room was only for people serious about healing, and if I wasn't willing to trust the process, perhaps I should return to the main forum. I logged off and didn't return for 3 days. When I finally went back to check the site, the recovery room had been locked. I could still see the main forum, but my access to the private section was gone. I sent a message to the moderator asking what happened, and they responded that the recovery room had been closed for restructuring. Out of curiosity, I checked the profiles of the other members I'd connected with in the recovery room. Every single one showed they hadn't posted in days. Their last posts were all variations of the same theme, talking about feeling ready to take the final step toward peace, thanking the community for helping them find clarity. A sick feeling grew in my stomach. I went back through old posts, reading them with new perspective, and patterns emerged I hadn't noticed before. The moderators had been slowly isolating the most vulnerable members, moving them to the recovery room, then gradually introducing ideas about death being a valid solution to pain. They never said it directly, but the subtext was clear. They were encouraging suicide. I reported the site to multiple agencies, sent screenshots to suicide prevention organizations, and contacted the FBI's cyber division. I don't know what happened after that. The forum disappeared within a week, the URL leading nowhere. I never found out what happened to the other recovery room members. But sometimes I search their usernames on regular social media, trying to find any sign they're still alive. Most of the time, I find nothing. Sometimes I find obituaries. Young people who died alone, often in ways that were ruled suicide, dying within days or weeks of their last posts in that forum. I can't prove the connection. Can't prove that forum was a coordinated operation to encourage vulnerable people to kill themselves. But I know what I saw. I know how carefully the moderators crafted their messages, how they selected the most isolated members, how they built trust before introducing darker ideas. The deep web doesn't just host illegal marketplaces. Sometimes it hosts predators who hunt a different kind of victim, People who are suffering, isolated, and desperate for connection. And the scariest part is how legitimate it all seemed, how easy it was to mistake manipulation for support, how close I came to following their suggestions before something finally made me question what was happening. If you're grieving, if you're struggling, please reach out to legitimate organizations. Real support doesn't require anonymity or secret rituals or live stream ceremonies at 3 a.m. Real support doesn't isolate you further. And real support never, ever suggests that death is the answer to pain. Story 6. The Archive. Robert Mills, data analyst from Minneapolis. In 2022, I was working on a personal project, trying to build a database of missing persons cases that had gone cold. My goal was to find patterns that police might have missed, connections between cases that seemed unrelated. It was amateur detective work, the kind of thing people do when they have too much free time and an analytical mind. I spent months gathering information from public records, news archives, and online databases. The work was tedious, but I found it meaningful. Then a colleague who knew about my project sent me a link to a deep web archive that supposedly contained case files from police departments nationwide, leaked records that had never been made public. I accessed the archive and was stunned by the scope. Thousands of case files, photographs, interview transcripts, everything you'd find in an actual police database. It was exactly what I needed to expand my research. I downloaded several hundred files related to cases I was already tracking, planning to cross-reference them with my existing data. That's when I noticed files that didn't match any public records. Cases with no associated news coverage, no missing person reports, no evidence they'd ever been investigated at all. Just detailed documentation of disappearances that seemed to have been completely ignored. Curious, I opened one file at random. It contained photos of a young man, maybe early 20s, in various locations. The photos looked candid, taken without his knowledge. Below the images was a detailed timeline of his movements over several weeks. Then a final entry with a date, a location, and the word acquired. I checked the name against every missing persons database I had access to. Nothing. This person had apparently vanished without anyone reporting them missing, without any public record of their existence beyond these files. I spot-checked 10 more random cases. Same pattern. Detailed surveillance followed by acquisition, followed by silence. The horrible realization hit me slowly. This wasn't a police archive. This was documentation from the people making these individuals disappear. Someone or some organization was keeping meticulous records of abductions, and they disguised it as leaked police files to hide in plain sight. I immediately stopped downloading files and reported everything to the FBI. They took it seriously this time, launching a full investigation into the archive. But here's what still haunts me. In those few hours before I realized what I was actually looking at, I downloaded hundreds of files. My IP address had been logged accessing dozens of cases. And whoever maintained that archive now had my information, knew I'd seen their documentation, knew I'd reported them. For weeks, I waited for retaliation that never came. No threatening messages, no photos of my house, nothing. The silence was almost worse than a threat. The FBI investigation went nowhere, the archive disappeared, and I was left with the knowledge that I'd been cataloging real victims without realizing it. Sometimes I still search for the names from those files, hoping to find missing person reports, hoping someone noticed these people were gone. I never find anything. It's like they never existed at all. And that's the most terrifying part. Not the violence itself, but the idea that people can disappear so completely that no one even knows to look for them. Story 7. The Trading Cards. Emily Harrison, 24, Philadelphia. I need to tell you about something that happened last year that I still don't fully understand, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Before this happened, I worked as a junior marketing coordinator for a small auction house that specialized in vintage collectibles. My job involved researching old trading cards, antique toys, and memorabilia from companies that no longer existed. It was quiet work, the kind of job where you spend hours alone with databases and auction catalogs, and I liked it that way. In March 2023, I was working on a project cataloging a collection of vintage baseball cards from the 1950s. I spent my evenings browsing collector forums, learning about grading systems, authentication methods, and the underground market for rare finds. That's when I started noticing references to a deep web marketplace that supposedly sold collectibles you couldn't find anywhere else. People mentioned it in cryptic terms, calling it the archive or the collection, always with a kind of reverence that suggested it was something special. I was curious, maybe too curious. I'd never accessed the deep web before, but I followed some tutorials and got Tor running on my laptop. Finding the marketplace took longer than I expected. It wasn't listed on any of the hidden wiki pages I found, and the URL was only shared through private messages on collector forums. I had to build trust with some serious collectors over a few weeks before anyone would even acknowledge the site existed. When I finally got the link, I remember sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of wine, feeling like I was about to discover some secret treasure trove. The site loaded slowly, revealing a clean, professional interface that looked more like a legitimate auction house than anything shady. The header read Archival Collections, Curated Acquisitions, in an elegant serif font. Categories were listed along the side: vintage toys, printed materials, ephemera, audiovisual materials, and at the bottom, almost hidden, private collection, restricted access. I spent an hour browsing the public sections first. Everything seemed legitimate. Vintage action figures, old movie posters, magazines from defunct publications. Prices were high but not unreasonable for rare collectibles. Each item had detailed provenance, condition reports, and professional photographs. Seller ratings showed hundreds of successful transactions. It all looked real, trustworthy even. Then I clicked on Private Collection, Restricted Access. A dialog box appeared asking for an access code. Below the entry field was a small link that said, Request Access. I clicked it without thinking much about it, filling out a short form that asked about my collecting interests and experience. I mentioned my work at the auction house, figuring credentials might help. I submitted the form and went to bed, not expecting anything to come of it. The response came the next morning. An email from an address that was just random letters and numbers said, Dear collector, your application has been reviewed and approved. We believe you possess the discretion and appreciation necessary for our specialized inventory. Access granted for 48 hours. Please note that all viewed items are logged for quality control purposes. Welcome to the collection. There was a temporary access code included. I should have questioned why they responded so quickly, why they mentioned logging my views, why access was time-limited. But I was excited, feeling like I'd been admitted to some exclusive club. I entered the code that evening after work, and the restricted section loaded. First, nothing seemed wrong. The layout was identical to the public sections, just with different inventory. Then I started actually looking at what was being sold, and my excitement turned into confusion, then slowly into horror. The items were photographs, thousands of them, organized into albums by year and geographic location. The earliest albums dated back to 1987, the most recent to just 3 months prior. Each album contained anywhere from 50 to 200 images. The preview thumbnails showed what looked like documentation, clinical and detached, but when I clicked on the first album, labeled Northeast Collection 1994 to 1997, I understood I was looking at something terrible. The photographs were crime scenes, not historical archives or artistic interpretations. Real documentation of violence. Bodies in various states, positioned in ways that suggested these weren't accidents or natural deaths. Each photo had a small caption with a date, a location description like rural area, roadside, or abandoned structure, and a number. Just a number, no names, no other context. I felt my stomach turn, but I couldn't look away. I clicked through several more albums, hoping I was misunderstanding, hoping there was some legitimate explanation. The Midwest Collection 2001 to 2005 showed similar content. The West Coast Collection 2008 to 2012 was the same. Every single album was a catalog of violence, meticulously documented and organized. What made it exponentially worse was the marketplace interface around these images. Each photograph had a price listed in cryptocurrency. Most were priced between $50 and $500, but some, labeled as premium acquisitions or rare documentation, were listed for thousands. There were purchase counts showing how many times each image had been sold. Some had been purchased dozens of times. Below the main gallery was a section called Collector Requests. It was formatted like a wishlist feature you'd find on any normal marketplace, except instead of products, people were requesting specific types of documentation. Seeking Northwest region, outdoor setting, 1990s. Looking for urban environment, multiple subjects, recent. The requests were coded, but their meaning was clear. People were commissioning violence, or at least commissioning documentation of it. My hands were shaking as I took screenshots of everything I could, page after page of this nightmare catalog. There were community features too, discussion boards where collectors shared their acquisitions, rated the quality of different sellers, and discussed authentication methods. They talked about these photographs like rare baseball cards, debating provenance and condition and rarity. One discussion thread caught my attention. Someone was complaining that recent acquisitions from a particular seller seemed staged and not authentic. Other collectors chimed in with advice on how to verify authenticity. Red flags to look for that might indicate images weren't from primary sources. They talked about metadata, photographic analysis, and cross-referencing with public records to confirm legitimacy. These weren't casual browsers stumbling onto something disturbing. These were dedicated collectors with technical knowledge and resources. I found a section labeled Archives by Subject, and against every instinct telling me to stop looking, I clicked it. The albums here were organized not by location or date, but by the people in the photographs. Individual galleries showing the same victims across multiple images, sometimes spanning years. Surveillance photos showing people in their daily lives, then later images showing their final moments, then crime scene documentation. Complete narratives of stalking, violence, and aftermath, all packaged as collectible sets. Some of these galleries had dozens of images. I realized I was looking at serial cases, multiple victims attributed to the same source. One gallery labeled Ohio Series, 1998 to 2003, contained over 80 photographs across 9 different victims. Below the gallery was a seller rating and reviews from buyers. Excellent quality documentation, well preserved, highly recommended source, like they were reviewing a fucking used car. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run completely cold. One of the more recent galleries, labeled Philadelphia Area, 2022 to 2023, contained surveillance photographs taken in locations I recognized. A coffee shop I visited regularly, a park 3 blocks from my apartment, a bus stop I used every morning for work. These weren't from some distant city or decades past. This was happening here now in my neighborhood. I clicked into the gallery with shaking hands. There were 17 images total. Early photos showed exterior shots of buildings and public spaces, all locations within a 2-mile radius of where I lived. Then came surveillance photos of a young woman. Dark hair, mid-20s, photographed walking to work, sitting at a cafe, entering an apartment building. I didn't recognize her specifically, but she looked like 100 women I'd see in my neighborhood on any given day. The final images in the gallery were dated just 2 months ago. I won't describe what they showed. What destroyed me was the caption below the gallery: Philadelphia Collection, ongoing. Additional acquisitions expected within this geographic area. Premium documentation guaranteed. Ongoing. They were still active in my city. Still watching people in places I went every single day. And there was a waiting list. 11 collectors had requested notification when new items from this source became available. I closed my laptop so hard I'm surprised the screen didn't crack. For several minutes I just sat there, trying to control my breathing, trying to process what I'd just seen. Then I did what I should have done the moment I saw the first photograph. I called the police. The response was complicated. The officer who took my initial call was skeptical, clearly thinking I'd either been pranked or had stumbled onto elaborate horror fiction. When I insisted it was real and gave them details about the Philadelphia connections, they sent a detective to my apartment. Her name was Detective Sarah Morales, and she specialized in cybercrimes. I showed her everything. The screenshots I'd taken, the access code, the URL, all of it. Her expression shifted from professional skepticism to genuine alarm as she scrolled through the images on my laptop. She immediately called in specialized units, and within 2 hours, my small apartment was filled with federal agents from the FBI's cybercrime division. They imaged my entire hard drive and took possession of my laptop. I answered questions for 6 straight hours. How did I find the site? Who gave me the URL? What exactly had I clicked on? Had I purchased anything? Had I communicated with anyone on the platform? They treated me professionally, but I could tell they were evaluating whether I was a witness or a suspect. The agent in charge, a stern woman in her 50s named Special Agent Chun, explained that they were aware of marketplaces like this, but they disappeared and reappeared constantly, always staying ahead of investigations. She said most of the images on these sites were collected from actual crime scenes, stolen from police databases or leaked by corrupt officials, then repackaged and sold. But some, she admitted, were commissioned. Original content created specifically for these collectors. That phrase, original content, made me want to throw up. They confiscated my access code and told me not to attempt to visit the site again. Not that I could have. By the next morning, the URL led nowhere. My 48-hour access window had expired, and the entire marketplace had apparently been taken down or moved to a new address. The FBI said this was common. These sites monitored for law enforcement attention and could relocate within hours. Detective Morales followed up with me over the next several weeks. They'd identified some of the locations in the photographs I'd seen and were cross-referencing them with open cases. Some matched unsolved homicides or missing persons cases from the right time periods and locations. But many didn't match anything in their databases, suggesting victims who had never been reported missing, whose cases had never been investigated, who had disappeared without anyone noticing or caring. The Philadelphia gallery haunted me most. Morales told me they were actively investigating, that they'd increased patrols in the areas shown in the surveillance photos, that they were reviewing recent missing persons reports. But she also told me, quietly and off the record, that if these people were targeting transient populations, sex workers, undocumented immigrants, people without stable housing, there might not be reports to review. People who lived on the margins disappeared all the time, and sometimes no one filed paperwork. I quit my job at the auction house 3 weeks later. Couldn't stomach looking at collectibles anymore. Couldn't separate the innocent hobby from what I'd seen it become in that dark marketplace. I moved to a different neighborhood, somewhere far from the locations in those surveillance photos. I still walk past cameras and wonder if somewhere, someone is adding new images to a gallery, building a collection, waiting for the right moment. The FBI investigation is still open as far as I know. Morales told me they'd made some progress identifying sellers and buyers, but she couldn't share details. She did tell me that my screenshots had helped connect several galleries to active cases, which meant something, I guess. It meant those people hadn't been completely forgotten. It meant someone was finally looking. But I also know there were thousands of images on that site, thousands of victims, decades of violence cataloged and sold like merchandise. And that was just one marketplace. Agent Chun told me there were others, operating in different corners of the deep web, each with their own inventory and collector base. Sometimes late at night, I think about those buyer requests, people commissioning specific types of documentation. I think about the 11 collectors waiting for new acquisitions from Philadelphia. I think about the woman in those surveillance photos, whoever she was, and whether she's still alive or whether her final moments are now being traded between strangers who see her suffering as a collectible item. The deep web isn't just a place where terrible things are sold. It's a place where terrible things are commissioned, documented, organized, and preserved, where violence becomes commerce and human lives are reduced to inventory numbers. And the worst part is knowing that right now, while I'm typing this, someone somewhere is browsing a catalog, adding items to their cart, completing a purchase, and treating real human suffering as entertainment. I still have nightmares about those galleries, about the clinical way violence was documented, about the casual tone of the collector discussions, about the realization that for every image I saw, there was a real person who experienced that moment, who died alone while someone stood nearby with a camera, creating content for a marketplace I stumbled into while researching baseball cards. If you're reading this and you're curious about what's hidden in the dark corners of the internet, please learn from my mistake. Some things aren't hidden because they're hard to find. They're hidden because finding them means becoming aware of evil you can never unknow, never unsee, never forget. And that awareness changes you permanently. I'll never collect anything again. I'll never browse a marketplace without wondering what's being sold in the sections I can't see. And I'll never forget that somewhere in Philadelphia, in a neighborhood I used to walk through without fear, someone is still watching, still documenting, still adding to their collection. Story 8. The Final Session. Thomas Green, licensed therapist from Seattle. I've held professional licenses in psychology and counseling for 12 years, worked with trauma survivors, abuse victims, and people in witness protection programs. Confidentiality and client safety are foundations of everything I do. What I'm about to tell you violated every principle I've spent my career upholding, and it happened because I trusted the wrong referral. In January 2023, I received a call from Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a colleague I'd worked with on several difficult cases over the years. She explained that she had a client with severe complex trauma who needed specialized treatment but required absolute discretion. The client was involved in ongoing legal matters, couldn't risk their identity being compromised, and had specifically requested remote sessions through encrypted platforms. This wasn't unusual in my line of work. I'd provided therapy to witnesses in federal cases, victims of organized crime, people in genuine danger who needed help but couldn't risk exposure. Patricia vouched for the legitimacy of the situation and sent over a referral packet through our usual secure channels. Everything looked appropriate. Standard intake forms, a clinical assessment, insurance information that checked out, and a treatment authorization from a law firm I'd worked with before. The client wanted to use a video platform I hadn't heard of, something called Secure Session that supposedly offered military-grade encryption. They sent me instructions for downloading and configuring it, along with assurances from their legal team that the platform had been vetted for HIPAA compliance. I ran it past my own IT security consultant, who found nothing obviously wrong with it, though he noted the company behind it was difficult to research. I decided to proceed with caution. The first session was scheduled for a Thursday evening in late January. I logged into the platform at the appointed time, and the client connected a few minutes later. The video feed showed only a darkened silhouette, completely backlit so no features were visible. The voice was modulated, electronically altered to be unrecognizable but still clear enough for conversation. Given the client's security concerns, I'd expected something like this. "Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Green," the voice said. It was gender neutral, impossible to determine age or any identifying characteristics. "I want to be clear from the beginning that I can't share identifying information. My legal team has advised me that my safety depends on maintaining anonymity, even with my therapist. I hope you can work within those constraints." I explained that while it would make treatment more challenging, I understood the need for protection in certain situations. We spent that first session establishing basics. The client described experiencing severe trauma related to witnessing violence, feeling trapped in a situation they couldn't escape, and struggling with guilt over things they'd been forced to participate in. The descriptions were vague but consistent with victims of organized crime or trafficking situations I'd worked with before. Over the next 7 sessions, spanning about 6 weeks, the client gradually revealed more details. Always careful never to identify themselves or their location, but describing experiences that were deeply disturbing. They talked about being present during acts of extreme violence, about being coerced into participating, about developing psychological mechanisms to distance themselves from what they were witnessing. They described dissociative episodes, intrusive memories, and a constant fear that they'd be discovered if they tried to leave their situation. I provided standard trauma-focused therapy, working on grounding techniques, helping them process their experiences within the limitations of what they could share. I documented everything in my clinical notes, following protocols for mandatory reporting when clients described ongoing danger. But the client insisted they were working with federal authorities, that their situation was being handled, and that reporting would actually put them at greater risk. By the 8th session in early March, I felt we were making genuine progress. The client seemed more stable, less dissociative, better able to discuss their trauma without completely fragmenting. I remember feeling proud of the work we'd accomplished despite the unusual constraints. Then, 15 minutes before that 8th session was scheduled to end, something happened that destroyed everything I thought I understood about the situation. The client paused mid-sentence, and I heard muffled voices in the background. Not clearly enough to make out words, but definitely multiple people talking. The client's darkened silhouette turned slightly, as if looking toward someone off camera. Then they turned back to me and said something that made my chest tighten. "Dr. Green, I need to be honest with you. This isn't exactly what you think it is." Before I could respond, the video feed changed. The darkness lifted, replaced by normal lighting, and I could suddenly see the person I'd been talking to for 8 sessions. It was a young man, maybe late 20s, sitting in what looked like a professional studio setup. Behind him, I could see camera equipment, lighting rigs, and 3 other people watching monitors. "My name is David," he said, his voice now unmodulated and normal. "I'm an actor. Everything I've told you over these sessions was scripted. You've been participating in a research project studying therapeutic interventions with complex trauma cases. We've been recording all of our sessions." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What? I didn't consent to being recorded. This is a violation of..." "Your consent form included language about quality assurance recording." A woman's voice interrupted from off-camera. "Check your initial paperwork. You agreed to sessions being documented for training and research purposes." I pulled up the referral packet Patricia had sent me and scanned through the consent forms. There it was, buried in the middle of a dense paragraph of legal language. Client consents to session recording and documentation for quality assurance, professional training, and research purposes. I'd seen similar language 100 times in standard intake forms. I'd signed off on it without reading carefully because it came from Patricia, someone I trusted. "This is unethical," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whatever you're doing, this isn't legitimate research. I'm ending this now." "You can't end it," the woman said, stepping into frame. She was in her 40s, professionally dressed, holding a tablet. "Well, you can, but the recordings already exist. 8 sessions, approximately 6 hours of footage total, showing a licensed therapist providing clinical interventions based on fabricated trauma narratives. Do you understand what we have here?" I understood exactly what she was saying, but I couldn't believe it. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you directly," she said. "You've already given us what we needed. These sessions are going to be sold as premium content to a very specialized market. People who are interested in therapeutic techniques, psychological manipulation, professional boundaries being crossed. There's a surprisingly large audience for this type of material." "You're insane," I said. "I'll report this immediately. I'll contact the licensing board, law enforcement, everyone." She smiled, not warmly. "And tell them what? That you provided therapy to a fake client without properly vetting the referral? That you used an unsecured video platform you'd never heard of? That you didn't read your own consent forms? Dr. Green, if you report this, you'll be the one under investigation. At best, you'll face ethical violations from your licensing board. At worst, you'll lose your license entirely." She was right, and the realization made me feel sick. I'd been so focused on helping what I thought was a legitimate client that I'd cut corners, made assumptions, trusted a referral without proper verification. Everything I'd done was technically defensible, but it would look terrible under scrutiny. "The referral from Dr. Hoffman," I said. "That wasn't real either?" "Patricia Hoffman is very real," the woman said. "She just doesn't know anything about this. We spoofed her contact information. The referral packet you received was generated using publicly available templates and some social engineering. You never actually spoke to Patricia, did you? Just exchanged emails." "I hadn't. The initial contact had been through email, then document exchanges through what I thought was our secure system. I'd never picked up the phone to verify because Patricia and I had worked together remotely for years. We communicated primarily through email. It had never occurred to me to doubt it." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now you forget this ever happened," she said. "The recordings will be edited, your face will be blurred, your name will be removed. You'll just be DRG in the final product. No one will ever trace it back to you unless you force the issue by reporting it. If you stay quiet, you can walk away from this with your license and reputation intact. If you make noise, we'll make sure every detail of how easily you were manipulated becomes public. Your choice." The video feed cut off before I could respond. I sat there staring at the blank screen, my mind racing through everything that had just happened. I checked my call history with Patricia Hoffman. The number I'd been communicating with wasn't hers. I checked the email headers. They'd been spoofed using a sophisticated technique I didn't fully understand. I checked the law firm that supposedly authorized treatment. The lawyer whose name was on the documents didn't exist. I'd been completely played. Every single element of the setup had been fake, carefully constructed to exploit my professional protocols and my trust in a colleague I'd worked with for years. I spent the next week in a state of paralysis, unsure what to do. I eventually reached out to Patricia Hoffman through her actual contact information and explained everything. She was horrified, confirmed she'd never sent me any referral, and urged me to report it immediately. But she also acknowledged what I already knew, that reporting it would likely end my career. I consulted with 3 different lawyers, and they all said essentially the same thing. The consent language I'd signed off on probably gave them legal cover for the recordings, even if obtained through deception. Prosecuting them would require admitting to multiple ethical violations on my part, signing forms without reading them, using unvetted technology platforms, failing to properly verify a referral. I might win eventually, but the process would destroy my professional reputation. In the end, I made the decision I'm still not sure was right. I reported it to the FBI's Cybercrimes Division, providing them with everything I had, but I didn't file complaints with my licensing board or make the situation public. The FBI agent I spoke with told me this was part of a larger pattern they were investigating, operations that targeted professionals in positions of trust, psychologists, doctors, lawyers, recording them in compromising or exploitable situations. He also told me something that keeps me awake at night. The research project excuse was a lie. These recordings weren't being sold as educational content. They were being sold to people who got off on watching psychological manipulation in real time. Watching a therapist unknowingly provide intimate counseling to a fake victim. Watching professional boundaries be navigated. Watching the moment when the truth was revealed and the therapist realized they'd been deceived. There was a market for that. A market of people who enjoyed watching trust be weaponized and professionals be humiliated. And I'd provided them 6 hours of premium content without ever realizing I was performing. The FBI investigation went nowhere, as far as I know. The platform I'd used disappeared within days. The woman who confronted me in that final session was never identified. And somewhere on the deep web, there are videos of my therapy sessions being traded and sold to people I'll never know. I still practice therapy, though I'll never work remotely again. Every referral gets verified through multiple channels. Every platform gets vetted by security experts. Every consent form gets read word by word, line by line, before I sign anything. I've become paranoid in ways that probably make me less effective as a therapist, but I can't help it. What destroys me isn't just the violation of my professional ethics. It's knowing that 8 times, I sat down with genuine compassion and clinical skill, trying to help someone I thought was suffering. And every moment of that care, that professional intimacy, was being packaged and commodified for strangers who saw it as entertainment. The deep web doesn't just trap victims of violence or exploitation. Sometimes it traps people who dedicate their lives to helping others, turning their compassion into content, their professional expertise into a product. And the most insidious part is that they make you complicit in your own exploitation by getting you to sign forms, click buttons, agree to terms you don't fully read. I was lucky in some ways. My face was blurred, my name was removed, and I still have my license. But I'll never forget sitting in that studio lighting, watching that woman smile as she explained how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. And I'll never stop wondering who's watching those sessions right now, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and whether they're enjoying my humiliation as much as the producers hoped they would. If you're a professional reading this, please learn from my catastrophic mistake. Verify everything. Trust no one. Read every word of every document, because there are people out there who specifically target professionals, who study our protocols and exploit our desire to help, who turn our strengths into weaknesses. And once they have you on video, once they have documentation of your mistakes, you're trapped between reporting the crime and protecting your career. I chose protecting my career. I'm still not sure if that makes me a coward or a realist. All I know is that somewhere in the darkness of the internet, videos exist that I can never erase, showing moments I thought were private and sacred, now sold to the highest bidder for purposes I can't bear to imagine. And the worst part? They were right. If I tried to fight this publicly, if I made noise, if I demanded justice, I would lose everything I've worked for. They knew that from the beginning. They counted on it. And they were absolutely correct. That's how the deep web works. It doesn't just host illegal marketplaces. It hosts operations sophisticated enough to exploit professionals, to turn our own ethical frameworks against us, and to leave us so compromised that silence becomes the only rational option. I hate them for what they did, but I hate myself more for falling for it. Finally, these 8 stories share a common thread: ordinary people making small decisions that led them into extraordinary danger. The dark web isn't a distant threat that exists only in movies or news reports. It's a real space where real predators operate with sophistication and patience. What makes these stories terrifying isn't the violence or the technology. It's how easily it started. A link clicked out of curiosity. A message answered without suspicion. A hobby pursued too far. In each case, someone crossed a threshold without realizing it, and by the time they understood the danger, they were already being watched. If you take anything from these accounts, let it be this: anonymity on the internet is an illusion. Every click leaves a trail, every visit is logged somewhere, and there are people who spend their time tracking those trails, looking for opportunities. The dark web isn't hidden because it's hard to find. It's hidden because the people who operate there want to control who finds it and when. Stay safe. Stay skeptical, and remember that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again.